I am BJ Lacrone, and I volunteer and work at Loudon Wildlife. And Loudon Wildlife, for those that are local, there's lots of great events locally to participate in. Virtually, we do have Amy Mason on this call also, and she's doing a great talk on the 22nd on wildflowers and spring ephemerals. So come back and see us then. We have at least 3 bird walks a month that people enjoy, and some special bird walks this month are like Dulles Greenway Wetlands Walk, and there's a waterfowl workshop that's really fun too. So if you want to join that workshop, it is also virtual, and you can learn a lot about the waterfowl. And so please do go to our website and check out our other events. We're lucky to have Jake come back again. He spoke the first time last year. So really appreciate the help and the education that Jake and Amy are doing for Loudon Wildlife. And I'll pass it over to Jake to talk about himself and the presentation. Thanks.
Thank you. Good. Share my screen here. Maybe a couple spoilers there. I'm very sorry. Yeah, so I actually said I'm Jake. Thank you all for joining me tonight, and whoever does in the future. Really, the whole purpose of doing this talk in particular is just to get you a little more interested and maybe knowledgeable about just the unique qualities of winter. Because I know myself personally, I have a tendency to, when it gets cold, I kind of want to curl up next to a fire, not really leave the house for the months. But every time I do, I go out, I take a hike, I go birding, do whatever. I always find myself really enjoying the parts of winter that are just so different from every other season. So, for instance, we'll get into a couple instances later. But yeah, really just the goal of this talk is just to get you a little excited, maybe want to go out, do some tracking, see what you can see while it's still the cold season. First off, though, just a little bit about me. I have a bachelor's in wildlife conservation from Virginia Tech. While I was there, I worked in forestry and owl surveying. I also worked at a reserve in South Africa, where I taught big kids there about wildlife. Done the same here, continue to do the same here in Virginia. I'm also a Virginia Master Naturalist, and I work at Banshee Reeks Nature Preserve. Some of you might be joining me later for the walk next week there. And I'm a docent at the Blue Ridge Wildlife Center. You may see here. It's that pretty picture up in the corner. If you have any questions during the whole thing, I'll put my email at the end too, but put my email down here. And I can't promise to know everything in the world. In fact, I wouldn't want to know everything in the world. I think that'd be pretty boring, but I can do my best to answer any questions you have. And if you email me, maybe I can do some research and answer them a little bit better. But with that all said, let's get started about the actual talk. Like I was saying, winter is different. For one thing, there are no leaves, which I know makes a lot of people just think it's gray, but really that just lets you see the sunset through a forest. And I think that's just a really cool thing to be able to do. For instance, I took a walk up a mountain to watch a sunset with a friend the other day. And we got up to the spot a little bit too early, so we just kept walking. When we turned around, it was a little bit late, so the sunset had started, but we just watched the whole thing through a forest until we got to the actual overlook and got the real visual of it. And it was nice. It was kind of fun to be able to just look through the trees and still see everything. Another thing, snow is beautiful, but also fantastic for tracking. You really can't track like that in many other, well, here, you can't really track like that so easily. You can just tell what every animal is doing for days at a time, just depending on how much snow you got and how long it stayed. Also, it's super quiet. If you're like me and you've ever done a night hike where the entire goal was trying to hear a bunch of different animals at night during the height of cicada season, that is a little bit difficult. And you've kind of learned to appreciate just the quiet aspects of winter. With that, I always like to use all of my senses when you're walking around, trying to just think about nature and just kind of get a feel for everything. I always like to use all the senses because it's easy to just walk around and look at stuff and just think that way. But really, there are a lot more things that go into it, especially when it comes to sound. Like I like to just stop and try to just almost count how many sounds I can hear, or just pinpoint different things and just kind of get a whole, visual almost, but really add something to it. You smell, or when you use sound there. There's also smell. That's pretty fun. We'll get into that. And touch and taste. When it comes to wildlife, we appreciate if you didn't poke and lick it. But with some plants, given that they're not dangerous plants, it can be pretty fun to poke it or eat it. I will leave that up to you guys. Please be careful. Like I said, when it comes to smell, a big one is predators. I always like to say, I've never seen a leopard in the wild, but I have smelled one. We went past a den of one time, and you could really, you could smell its dinner. We'll put it that way. A lot of the time you can smell snow when it's either coming or it's here, kind of like rain. There's also skunk cabbage, which, like the leopard, kind of smells like a dead body. That's because flies are its main pollinator. So it does try to attract them in a way that we don't find so pleasant. That's right. But they are very cool looking. They come out in very, very early winter, oftentimes when there's still snow on the ground. And they actually melt that snow. With that, you have actual skunk, which I just hope you don't smell. That's no fun. Then there's cedars. I always love when cedars kind of just have a smell that'll walk towards you as you're walking. But sometimes you do have to kind of crush a little branch or something in your hand and smell it. It's just nice. Spice bush. This is another very fun one for smell. Like I said, most of the smell is plants. But that's kind of a scratch and sniff situation. So if you ever see a little bushy plant, kind of like this, the twigs have nice little dots on them. They also have pretty much perfectly round buds that do turn yellow like you have here. But yeah, if you kind of scratch and sniff or maybe break off a little twig at the end, smell it, has this really nice sweet smell. It's always been a favorite of mine. And then last we have sassafras, which a lot of people say smells kind of like a sort of Fruit Loops. Smells like Fruit Loops. I kind of agree with that. It's a fun smell. Then we have sound. You got the classics, clicks and cracks and crunches, squeaks periodically, mouse or something like that. Sometimes if you get lucky, you'll hear a coyote calling. These are mostly at night, but I know the night hikes I've done. Heard a good couple of them. It's a good time. And birds, they're the big ones. Year round, majority of what you're gonna hear that's an animal making noise is gonna be birds. The more familiar with them they get, the more fun it is. Don't worry, we'll talk about them later. And yeah, lastly, it's just silence. Especially with snow, it'll really eat up that sound. And like I said, if you got tired of the cicadas like I did, enjoyed it for a second, but after a while, if you're trying to hear anything else, it got to you. Yeah, so you just kind of, it's always a little nice to hear that sound, especially when you have city sounds too. So, like I said, we're going to get back to bird sounds. So first off, you might think that you haven't heard a hawk, but you definitely have, and you've just heard an eagle masquerading as a hawk in movies. So a lot of the time, those majestic screeches that you hear from eagles in the movies and everything like that are just red-tailed hawks. That's what you see right here, red-tailed hawk. yeah, so eagles actually have a kind of funny little high-pitched scream. It's not very pleasant. There's a reason that they use the hawk ones. Then we have blue jays, which can actually mimic hawks. So sometimes you'll hear a hawk and you'll get really excited. You're like, oh man, cool, a hawk. And you go looking around for it and you see a blue jay. You go, never mind, they got me. But they also have just other harsh calls that they use, and they're a little weird. But yeah, that one will get you every time you go birding. You get all excited, and nope, they tricked you. And there are crows that nasally call weird. I feel like everyone's pretty familiar with them. Owls, we have 2 eastern screech owls here as an example, but we have 3 main ones that you would probably hear calling. These 2 are from the Blue Ridge Wildlife Center. That one's name is Dopey. That one's Patches. They're awesome, especially Dopey. So they're the eastern screech owl, and what they do is they kind of whinny. They sound a little bit like a horse. So we have a lot of birds here sounding like other animals, but I always like to say if you hear a horse and you can't really see a horse, but you are near a forest, there's a good chance that it's just an eastern screech owl. They're kind of funny little guys. Then you have the barred owl. It's a medium-sized owl. And it does that call that everybody tends to love. It goes, who cooks for you? Who cooks for you all? It's kind of fun to hear. Those ones are a little more likely to see or hear during the daytime. And then we have the biggest one, the great horned, and that's really just a hoo-hoo kind of call. Like it's just really your classic owl sound, your classic owl look while you're at it. Looks pretty similar to a eastern screech owl, but it's just much bigger. And then we have cardinals. These ones are pretty fun too because they kind of like make little Star Wars noises and just go pew pew. If you listen for it, it's fun to make little noise like that. Then lastly, we have dark-eyed juncos. They're kind of representing all of our small songbirds. They're kind of just a series of high-pitched notes, so they're like, and then just continue on like that. It's about the same note, just keeps going. They're a little more fun to see for me. I always like to mention them because they're one of the few ones that actually migrate here for winter. So this is their calm, warm ground. That's kind of fun. Spoiler alert here, we are about to talk about what birds look like visually. So we're just going to talk about these ones while they're here. So for one, you can already see them, but we'll point out a few things. Blue jay, clearly blue. But it also has this nice little hat up there. Very cool looking bird. He also got a nice crown, a nice beak on the male cardinals there. But like again, we're all pretty familiar with crows, medium-sized blackbird. There's not too much to say there, to be honest. Most common hawk you're going to see around is this red tail. Now they won't always have a red tail. They do have different color morphs, but it's a pretty telltale sign. And most likely it will be a red tail. They really like road edges and the edges of woods and clearings and things like that. They like to get a high vantage point, just kind of look for their prey. And then we got the dark-eyed junco over here. Really kind of a cool looking bird for the little thing. It's got a nice dark color up top, white on the bottom, like most birds. But there's also a nice white, this nice light beak here. Makes it really easy to tell what it is from a distance because it really stands out against that darker gray. Then here we have, well, they look like owls. Eastern screech owls, they're about the size of my hand here. They're the one I was holding in that first picture, so really pretty small. And got some nice stripes. These two are different color morphs. So you have a red color morph and a gray. Those are 2 pretty common ones to see with eastern screech owls. So like I said, spoiler alert, we're going to be talking about sight, starting with physical birds. Like I said, they are year-round the easiest thing to see and to just observe as they forage and just live their lives. We talked about the rest of them, but a couple more I'd like to talk about, and some I'd like to reiterate. We have the bald eagle, the black vulture, and the turkey vulture. So these can be kind of similar to look at in real life. So we'll start talking about the vultures. One, we have a black vulture here. She's a fun one as well. There's a black head, but you can't always see the black head. Turkey vultures, they have that red head there. Again, I don't like to rely on that too much because they're harder to see when they're in the air. And 90% of the time, you're going to be seeing them while they're in the air. So when you do look up, you see the vultures. You see the black vulture has this nice white wingtip there. Just right at the tip of the wing, there's just this nice white bar, really flashes out, where the turkey vulture has that white all the way down the wings there. So that's one big main difference that you can look at while just looking up in the air and seeing them. You know, there they are. So if you really want to do a little party trick there, you can point up at a speck in the sky and say, that's a black vulture, that's a turkey vulture. You can also play the game called This is an Eagle, because eagles don't get that white head and tail until they're about 5 years old. So they can be a little bit harder to recognize in the sky. And they're also a pretty similar size and shape to vultures. One big difference, though, is that while they are similar size, they are significantly heavier than vultures. So they do have to spend a little bit more energy to keep themselves just afloat. So if you see sort of like what looks kind of like a vulture flying along in the sky, but it's just flapping a lot more and a lot more consistently, well, that'll be an eagle. So there you go. There's your party trick for the day. And we also have, like I told you earlier, the little guy, yeah, eastern screech owl. Then we have the barred owl, it's with a D. That one's pretty. He's got some nice stripes down the front there. Nice yellow beak. Most of the time you won't really be able to see it. But the main difference between the barred owl and the great horned and the screeches that I want you to notice is just its lack of big ears up top. And this is the one that you will most likely see during the day. I've seen it a lot of times, either right before dusk or at like 5 o'clock in the middle of summer, you might still see a barred owl just flying along in the middle of the woods, maybe calling, like that. Then you have a white-throated sparrow. Really any sparrow, there's just gonna be a ton out doing their thing, having fun. But white-throated are in the area for winter. They're pretty cool looking birds. They got that nice little yellow eye stripe there. But yeah, really a lot of sparrows look pretty similar and they are all out having a good times at all times. Then we have the American woodcock and the eastern towhee. Now we are on the border of the range where they are here year round. So they're not super likely in either direction to be here, but I have seen the 2 of these in the last month, at eastern towhee in the last week. So if that tells you anything, there you go. They are fun birds to see though. So the American woodcock, it's very fun in general because when it's doing its mating display, it does this whole fly up in the air in a circle and make a whole bunch of noise thing, and it's just really fun to see. But also, it has almost no tail, basically no neck, and this very, very long beak with pretty long wings. So as you're going along, you'll see a woodcock flying, and you'll basically just see these 2 pairs of wings and a potato in the middle, and it is just, it's kind of funny. You'll think, oh, what is that? And then you just go, that's right, it's a woodcock, because there's basically no head and no neck attached, just one really big beak. So it's just a fun game to play. Then let's see. Yeah, sorry, we have the eastern towhee. This one is actually a personal favorite of mine. I like this one. This is the one that goes, drink your tea. I probably hear them a lot. And a lot of the time they'll just go drink and they'll trick you for a second, but then you'll remember what they are. They're a pretty bird. They have a nice white belly. Their sides are orange, and then you got that black on top there, especially that stark black head there. Just very pretty bird. Very fun to see. I enjoy them. A lot of the time, you will see birds constantly, but you may or may not hear about 30 birds in a tree and not be able to see one. So this is where we see if we can trick you a little bit, even with these ones that can stand out. We'll see if you can find them. Let's do. Oh. Those ones, we'll just give you a second, see if you can find it, and then I'll point it out. So later on, though, I will quiz you, I won't lie. There we go. Here's our little buddy, standing out all pretty. It's a nice little cardinal. They're kind of hard to take pictures of, but nice little cardinal just standing out real nice against that black and white there. And this one's a little bit harder. Give you a minute for that one. Always a fan. All right, so this one, we have a tufted titmouse. That one's a little fun too. They have a little call, just go Peter, Peter, Peter. It's kind of fun. Yeah, so even without the leaves, it can still be kind of hard to see birds, especially the smaller ones. It can be tricky, it can be right in front of you, still won't be able to see them. Sneaky that way, just adds to the fun though. So when you can't see them, you can sometimes see signs of them. The big sign being nests. A lot of the time without the leaves, you can really see the bigger nests a lot more easily. And some of these will be birds, but a lot of these will be squirrels. Big difference being squirrels' nests are made mostly of leaf litter and other nice soft materials for them to kind of cozy up in. But really, when you see the leaves disappear like this, you can really see those nests stand out there very easily against the sky. It's kind of fun. And then there are holes and everything like that they can live in. Snags like this for any kind of wildlife is actually fantastic. It's a lot of things like dead trees, stuff like that. They will have a ton of bugs, things like that living around in them. And so a lot of birds will be able to feast on said bugs, and they'll also be able to live in the tree, especially from the holes that woodpeckers made getting to those bugs and things like that. It's a whole frenzy, and it's just a fantastic little ecosystem booster right there. So every time you see a nice standing snag like that, especially, just go check it out. There could even be a flying squirrel. Or just appreciate that it exists personally. Yep, we're still talking about birds. You can't tell, I kind of like birds. Another sign is peck marks, and a couple of these can be very telltale signs of different birds. So pileated woodpeckers, which are bigger ones, very pretty, fun to see. They actually make ovals whenever they peck into the wood there. The holes they make are these pretty big, most of the time, ovals. Now, in the case of this one tree over here, all right, it was already pretty dead. It was pretty punky. So if you kind of went in with your finger, it would just kind of slough off a bunch of wood. So when a pileated came in here and started pecking, it just demolished half the tree, just ripped it right off. But you can still see little areas where there are those telltale signs that nice, big, oval hole made by a woodpecker, pileated woodpecker. The funny thing was, though, when we were looking at this tree and we were trying to decide for sure if it was a pileated, one started calling just a little ways off, and it kind of answered it for us. You got that idea of, yeah, it is probably a pileated woodpecker hole if there's one this nearby right now yelling at us. Then we have the yellow-bellied sapsuckers. They are very fun, and things they will do is right at the beginning of spring, when the sap starts to flow, they like to go in, make a hole, wait till the sap runs out, and eat the sap. The thing is, when they make the holes, they make them into these very neat little lines, just little rows of holes every time. So you can see here they had pretty good success with the amount of sap running down this tree afterwards. But yeah, every time you see a tree, a bunch of holes just poked into a line like that perfectly. That'd be a yellow-bellied sapsucker. Always fun to see. And then one our last one, it's an honorable mention because it is not native, but it's just a cool example. It's an acorn woodpecker. That one will just poke a hole, put an acorn in it as storage, and they will do this over like whole trees. They really go above and beyond their craft. It's just it's a fun little example there. Now, don't worry, we're done with birds for now, but we're not done with holes. So a lot of other things can live in holes. Pileated woodpeckers are actually ecosystem engineers. So in a way, they will dig a hole themselves, and then other things will start using that hole just because it's big enough. Bears are not one of the things that we use that hole though. But they do live in holes. They'll be living in the top of trees, places like that, wherever really they can fit. Woodchucks live in much smaller holes. They're actually just small enough so that the woodchuck can get in, but foxes and coyotes, which are their main predators, can't, which is kind of cool. They also have very intricate systems, several different rooms designed for different things. Little fun fact there, it is rare to find woodchuck scat because they actually have a latrine in one of their holes. I think as humans, we take for granted having safe spaces to do our business. Well, woodchucks do not. So they have a little spot for it. It's very rare to see any of their business. Oddly enough, though, foxes, while they also live in holes, will sometimes live in woodchuck holes. I know, I just said they're too big for them, but they'll do is they'll just dig out, because they already did half the work for them. The fox will just dig out more of that hole, not the entire thing. They don't need that much room down there. So they just dig out more of the hole and kind of live in that space that the woodchuck has already created. And oddly enough, sometimes the woodchuck will also be living in that hole. So it'll just be living deeper in, using its emergency exits and using the rest of its rooms that the fox still can't get to because it's still too big and it would have to dig out that entire system and it just can't. So that's kind of an interesting and funny little thing that happens periodically. I'm sure not very often. But beyond that, I will not list anything more things that live in holes because a lot of things live in holes. They're very safe, easy access, things like that. Now we can move on to tracks. Step one, when you get to wanting to check out tracks, is just get a field guide and a ruler because you won't know everything. You don't have to know everything, but it does help to know what you're looking for and what you're looking at and to be able to measure it. So for example, the things that you might want to look at, the main things when you're looking at tracks and trying to figure out what they are. So you want to count the toes. You want to see if you can find the front and the back feet. You want to check out the length of the trail and the width of it. What they're doing doesn't necessarily help with ID, but it is kind of fun. That's one of my personal favorite things, just trying to figure out what the animal was doing while it was there. And lastly, okay, definitely not least, is the general shape. So when you first walk up to it, you want to be able to say, hey, this is definitely a bird, or by the look of it, a dinosaur, or this is definitely a squirrel. You can pretty well say this is a bird, not a mammal, when looking at it. And you can look at toe numbers. So for this gray squirrel over here, we have the back feet are in the front and the front feet closer together and in the back. And that's because they're kind of just bounding along the trail there. Do this little hop. That's just a very normal thing for you to see a squirrel doing, is just hopping like that and leaving those kinds of tracks there. One thing about it though is those front feet have 4 toes, while the back feet have 5 and are generally a little bit bigger. A lot of the time you won't necessarily see the full length of a lot of back feet, but they will generally be bigger, except for in the case of coyotes and foxes and things like that, where the hind feet are actually smaller. But you can see also the beaver, it also has 4 on the front, 5 on the back there. Now the back in the case of the beaver is way easier to see because it is meant for swimming. So it has these really big back feet with a nice web there, and the front feet that are a little more meant for gripping and things like that. So you can really tell the difference when you're looking at beaver tracks, whether it's a front or a back foot. When it comes to their trail, they leave pretty sporadic trails. They can either do what's called direct placement there, or where the front and the back just completely overlap, or they can just completely miss in general. They'll just kind of walk along and do whatever they want. But when you get down to the coyotes there, what it's doing on the left is trotting, and that is where it does, again, direct register. And that front and back foot is directly on top of each other and pretty well in front of each other too. Like, it doesn't have a very wide trail. One way to tell a coyote apart from a fox when you see their tracks, all around foxes are smaller, so it will have a smaller track in general, but also with that, we'll have a smaller trail. So where it's a 17 to 26 inches there, it might be 13 to 20 for the fox. They're just a little bit smaller because it is in fact a smaller animal. When we look over here at the right set of coyote tracks, it's actually increasing in speed. That's kind of a fun one to look at. Where it ends here and where you want to start taking the measurements is when it's in a full gallop, which is directly in front of each other like that. It's front, front, back, back. You can kind of see how they were going like that. It's really cool to just try to mimic a little bit what they were doing and put yourself where they were, just to see how it was going and everything like that. Tracks can be very fun. Another big thing for tracks is just knowing feline versus canine. In this example, it's a mountain lion versus a gray wolf. More likely here, it would be a bobcat versus a coyote. But we'll just go with mountain and gray wolf for here. So one of the big things, the differences is that a feline print will be a lot rounder than a canine. This would be a lot more of an oval shape. There are also, people like to say no claw marks versus claw marks. I like to treat those like leaves on trees, where they may or may not be there, but I wouldn't put money on it. You know what I mean? So claw marks a lot of the time can be just kind of iffy to look at. And I mean, felines still have claws. Just because they're retracted doesn't mean they might not be using it in that moment. So don't necessarily think too hard on the claw marks there. Another thing to look at is the felines have 2 lobes up top and 3 on the bottom in their heel there. And the canines have 1 lobe on the top and 2 lobes on the bottom, giving it more of a little U shape there. But my personal favorite thing to look for is the ability to draw an X cleanly through the blank spaces there, which you really can't do with feline, but with the canine, much every time, just draw a nice clean X through the blank spots there. It's a nice telltale sign, and just kind of it's a little fun to do in your head. Yeah, so if you ever see a feline around here that isn't tiny and explained by your cat, is most likely a bobcat. They're not likely to be seen. They are around. They also have tracks that are just a little bit less symmetrical. They'll kind of tilt one way or another, which is kind of interesting for them. So there's some examples now. And I wanted to say, if you can put in the chat what you think they are, we'll go through one at a time, and I'll give you some hints about the surrounding of these tracks. So for the first ones, we just saw this has pretty classic look to them for what they're doing. It has the back 2 smaller, or the front 2 smaller in the back there, and then the front 2 or back 2 bigger ones in the front. I'm confusing myself. But really, you can see something just bounded down this trail. And they're a little hard to see here. Like I said, no track is going to be perfect. If it is, you have gotten very lucky. What you can see a little bit there is about 4 claws there, 5 there. Nice little kind of hand look to them. And they are continuing straight up the trail towards the top of the screen there. Any guesses? One of those was right. It is, yeah, it is a, here we go, gray squirrel. But just like we saw in the last image, it's got that nice little bounding, everything like that. So this next one, I will tell you the first thing about this that I looked for is there is not a human track in sight. Aside from my own that I had just made, not a single human track in sight. This is about 2.5 inches long. You can see little claws there. You can draw the X. It's got a nice little one lobe at the top there. I know it's a canine. It's also pretty small. So, all right. Another canine. Yep, fox. Oh, I wish it was a wolf. That'd be pretty cool. Yeah, because it had that 2.5. It was a red fox. Interestingly, if it had been a gray fox, it would have just been a little bit smaller, probably. Would have been maybe about 2 inches instead of that 2.5. And it would have had just a slightly bigger pad there in the back. But yeah, pretty confident that it was a red fox. It's pretty cool. Cool to see. And I'd say the biggest part is that, yeah, it's not surrounded by any humans. I'm always a little hesitant when I find a canine track to not say it's just somebody's dog. But no humans, I'm happy about it. All right, then we have these ones over here. They're actually 2 of the same. This one's just a little bit older, has already melted. These one here, you can see the dew claws. I haven't talked about it yet, but it is an ungulate. These are hooves we're looking at. That narrows it down for you. Yep. Heck, you got it. We got white-tailed deer. And then the last one. It's very difficult, I know. Real hard to track, very rare to see. Yeah, me. That was a human. Very exciting. Elusive. We got some example trails. This is one of my favorite things to do as I'm walking around, is trying to figure out what animals we're doing. So it's one on the left here. It's very fun. I was looking at it and I realized that we have 2 little trails leading both here and here, and a whole bunch of tracks right here, right next to some vegetation. So you know that those deer found just a fantastic spot to go eat at for a little bit and then leave. So that was kind of fun to see. The next one here is also fun and especially great to look at if you're ever trying to put up a game camera, or if it's ever just snowed and you want to go find some tracks. This is a fantastic place to go, is a down log over a creek, because just like humans, animals do like to find the easiest way to get around things. So oftentimes they'll use our trails to walk down because it's easier, or they'll use down logs to get across the stream because, again, it's much easier. They've just created a bridge. So you'll see a lot of different tracks on this one. This log happened to be mostly squirrel tracks. I think there may have been a raccoon in there. I'm not positive. But it actually had the tracks of a squirrel that we will get to later. I was looking at. It's pretty cool. Always fun to see. There's a couple logs like that, and you can see across every one there's mostly squirrels going along. This one, eating signs. It's always fun for me because you always seem like you always get to feel like a real professional whenever you can pick something up off the ground and go, oh, I know exactly what was here. So first off, you have the clean cut versus the rip, and that will be rabbit versus deer. Now rabbits have these nice 2 incisors that will really cleanly clip off whatever it is they're eating. So you can see on the bottom row there, they have these nice, very clean, almost like someone took a little pair of clippers and just clipped that spot right off. And then deer on the top row, you can see they really just kind of ripped it. You can see, especially with this one piece over here, that they don't have that real fine clipping like the rabbits do. They just tear it right off. So it's always a little bit fun because they do have pretty similar diets, especially in winter. But then there's digging. So a lot of the time, turkey will kind of scratch around at the ground and just try to find bulbs and worms and things like that. So you'll see scratches in the leaf litter, and that's always kind of a fun telltale sign of wild turkey. Nuts alone can tell you a whole lot. And mostly around here we have gray squirrel, but we also do have a couple of different kinds like box squirrels and things like that. But over here, the top right, we have a gray squirrel that is eaten on this log right here. If you look real close, you can see more little pieces of its lunch that's left over. The way you can tell it's a gray squirrel is because it's been kind of ripped up a little bit more. It's just not very pretty looking. It's smaller chunks. They ripped in to that hickory nut pretty well, and just you can see sort of well in this picture the little teeth marks in there. They've been chewing on it and everything. Now this one was the very fun one for me. This was a southern flying squirrel. A lot of people I know don't necessarily realize that we have flying squirrels in the area, but we do. They're very cool. What they do is they'll kind of eat a hole into a nut and then get at the inside, get the meat. Because they are much smaller, kind of takes more effort. They can't just rip it apart like the other squirrels do. So they just a little hole. And if you look, you can see their little gnaw marks once again. It's really cool. Another thing that I actually learned today, and found today on a nut, was that they will also put these little tooth marks right at the top of it, make little gnaw marks so that they can hold it easier, so they can pick it up and carry it off to some place where it's safer for them to sit and eat it, which I thought was very cool. I quickly turned over this nut that I had that had been eaten by a flying squirrel, and sure enough, there are those little teeth marks right at the top, just getting ready to carry it off. That was very neat. And last but not least, if the thing you found that has been eaten is meat, that will definitely narrow your options down about who's been there. With that in mind, I'm about to show you some of the meat. So if you would not like to see the squirrel that I mentioned earlier, I would suggest looking away now. I would tell you when to come back. Don't worry about that there, but you've been warned. First off, we got prime suspect for the squirrel crime scene. There's a pretty good sized bird track here. And then we have all of those bird tracks leading right up to our squirrel friend here. And I thought this was just very neat. You could really see just what happened. There was a squirrel tracks leading up to this spot too, and actually across that log there that I told you about earlier. So it was just very cool. You could kind of see how at least part of his day went. The end of which did not go very well, but it went very well for what we think is a red hawk, a red-tailed hawk. But yeah, I thought that was just a very interesting thing because a lot of the time you don't really get to see hunting or evidence of hunting, or just a lot of evidence of animals living their lives much, and it's just a neat thing to see. Hopefully you guys found it neat. For those of you who didn't, you can look again because I'm going to show you some scat. Just the one example. This time there are plenty of examples, but I thought this one was the most fun. Like tracks, you do want to check out the shape and the size first and foremost. And then once you check those out, then you go for the contents. In this case, it is mostly little bits of shells, which tells you that they've been eating mostly crawfish. Now the location was the fun part here that really told you what it was. And some of you probably already know what it is, but the location was right on the edge of a riverbank. And so we had this big floodplain here, then a little bit, and then the river. So here, on the little bit that we were sitting on, we had just a whole bunch of different scat looking just like this, about the same size. Not super big. There, I should have put something there to show you about the size, but forgot at the time. But a bunch of different scats, all the same kind, just kind of scattered in this one area, and a bit of slide, so kind of a mudslide leading into the river, which is a very common thing, or many of you have probably guessed it, river otters. So river otters, one of their big things that they will eat are crawfish, and they do like to find one spot to do their business for a while, and also slide back into the river, almost like a penguin. So it was kind of fun to see, and you could kind of do the math looking around and go, yes, definitely a river otter, very cool. So we have some other signs of wildlife. So deer, often like to rub the velvet off of their antlers. So they'll do this by finding small trees, and oftentimes you'll see these rubs where the bark has come off of the trees. In this case, the tree's wood itself has become very smooth. So it's always kind of fun to see, especially you can just kind of guess the size of the deer too by just the size of the tree that they were rubbing on. That one's a little more iffy, but if you want to do that. Then we have game trails. Those are pretty common to see around by different animals, but probably most common is into fields by deer. So deer will make the bigger ones that you'll see around, and it's easiest to see when they just lay down the grass by walking through it. Sometimes you'll even see little round patches of grass where they've laid down. Very cool to see. But I always like when you can find game trails in the woods, in the harder to see areas and things like that. So I gave you two pictures down here in the middle there that are actually the same spot, the same game trail, just from a different angle. So the first one, you see it doesn't really look like a whole lot of anything. There's a little spot down here that you can't really see that goes down to the water. But other than that, it doesn't look like much, right? But if you did like my professor in college had us do, where you just lie down on the ground and try to put yourself in the headspace of a smaller animal like that and try to think of that world, that ecosystem as they might, well, then you can see something different. I always like to call it, there's one guy that called it the hunker method. You just hunker down, kind of look, try to pretend. It's just a very fun thing to do. It gives you a different perspective. And with that perspective, you see this perfect little trail here. Just a nice round little opening leading straight to the river. And you can tell there it's really empty. It's been pretty well worn down. There's patches on either side. But really from the top, you can hardly tell. It's just a fun little thing to do there. I always like to just change your perspective periodically. Try to find the game trails that aren't quite as obvious. Then we have the scratches on trees, and that can often mean bears. So we got very excited about this when we saw it. This last one here on the side, you see a whole bunch of different different scratches made in the tree. There's about 5 of them really in all, and you can see where it would be basically 4 fingers there and essentially a thumb. And what you don't see there is that you can follow those scratches. There's more scratches leading all the way up the tree, which is really cool. And they were all horizontal, so it can tell you that that bear was kind of clinging on with those front feet there, those front legs. And you can find some vertical ones. That's probably where it was kicking and gripping with the other legs. Just a really cool thing to see. There's a lot of things out there like that they're small. You just pick up more and more. I always like to say, when you're out looking for things in nature, especially for just signs of animals or plants or anything like that, it's kind of like stars. Just the more you look, the more you're going to see, the more exciting it gets. So those are just a few examples. And we have, that's pretty much it. But when in doubt, I always like to say, just play detective. So if you see something, you're not sure what it is, you hear a creak, you hear a crack, you hear a squeak, you're not sure what it is, just try to remember what you've heard recently. Try to just think about the area that you're in. So are you in a forest? Are you near a field? Are you in a field and near a forest? Are you near water? Things like that. What have you heard? What have you seen that day that it might give you a hint? It's okay if you're not right, or if you don't get it right, or if you don't get it right, somebody knows the answer, then you just learned a new thing. There you go. You really don't have to know everything about ecology, everything about animals or tracking or anything like that. Just give it a place to start and just try to play detective and have fun with it. There's another thing I like very much, which is trying to see the history of an area just by looking at the surroundings and trying to figure out what happened. So my favorite example of this is this very big, very old, very gnarled tulip poplar that is in the middle of a bunch of much smaller tulip poplars. You can tell it's in this much younger forest, but it itself is a very old tree. The thing is, tulip poplars usually go very straight and just very nicely go straight up, and there they are. So this one, being so gnarled and so just massive at the bottom, is surprising. But what I can tell you just from that one tree and just the one way it grew is that tree grew up when the area was a field. So when it was growing up, it didn't have competition for light, so it could grow out more than up. But when that competition for light was created by the rest of the field growing up into a forest, it had to grow up with the rest of it. So what it would do is it would start focusing all its resources up top, and the resources at the bottom that were no longer getting light would die off and essentially get pruned away, creating these scars, these lumps that you see all over this tree. That is now huge. It's nice history and can really tell you what happened in that spot right before you got there. You don't necessarily have to know things about ecology. You don't have to know much about forestry to know that you are in a relatively young forest that used to be a field long enough ago for that tree to have survived it. I think that's pretty neat. But again, you don't want to look at the history either. You can always just look at a nice pretty scene there in winter and just enjoy yourself for that. So with that, I always like to do a couple book recommendations and then ask if you have any questions. Tracking and the Art of Seeing, that's where I got a lot of these pictures from. It's a great book, a little bit old, still good. Sibley and Peterson guides in general are just fantastic. They're some of my favorites. The Cornell Laboratory, allaboutbirds.com. They are great for getting the sounds of birds and things like that. And also just everything else about them. It's just a great website. And if you want to have just like a nice day, kind of read some poetry, you can specifically read poetry about winter. Go outside, curl up by a fire, whichever. I would suggest the classic Sand County Almanac by Aldo Leopold. Just a beautiful book. It makes for just a better day. So once again, there's my email if you have any questions that you don't want to put here. Otherwise, are there any questions in general? So I'm just getting to some of the older ones about the squirrel. So the squirrel tracks did go straight up. Oh no, the tree was lying down and they just walked across it down the river and then went kind of up to where the carcass was. I think that was your question. I can think of. So squirrels actually are not, I'm just getting back to some of these questions here. I hadn't seen them before. Squirrels are not indiscriminate about the acorns that they eat. So they've actually done some tests, sort of. So specifically between red oaks and white oaks, they massively prefer white oaks. Not entirely sure why. I think they have a little bit more protein or something like that. But yeah, same thing with hickory nuts. They like particular nuts better than, say, bitter nuts or something like that. Yeah, they just taste different. They have different nutritious value. So they're definitely not indiscriminate about what they eat. I'm not entirely sure why the squirrel carcass was left there. I'm not sure how old it was. It may have just heard me coming and gotten scared off, come back for it later. But I don't know, it got the majority of the insides out, to be graphic about it. So I think it may have just been finished. I'm not entirely sure why it was left there. Again, like I said, I'm just playing detective. Okay. So I think I covered most of the ones from the chat from earlier, so I didn't get to them earlier. Anything else, you can put your sound on if you'd like, if that's easier.
I just wanted to say thank you very much. That was really fun the way you presented that.
Hey, I'm glad you liked it.
Hey, Jake, I was wondering if you've seen skunk cabbage at Banshee. It is now out now, right?
I haven't actually gone looking for it to see if it's out particularly right now, but we do have it, especially along Twin Springs Trail there. We have a couple of creeks that kind of come out, and it's all along those creeks. It's pretty cool. Actually, I have a picture of it in the Banshee in the bathroom at the visitor center.
Ah.
Yeah. And there's a bunch of it. For Meki, I've not done sessions for kids in school, but I think that'd be pretty cool. Be open to it. So for what's poisonous, they do have some field guides specifically for foraging and things like that. So they have edible plant field guides and things like that. And a lot of the time that will include things to avoid. So I would check out some of those. I do tend to get pretty hesitant eating things that I'm not sure of. I'm pretty good with berries, but mushrooms, some people will tell you, I don't necessarily trust them unless I trust the person I'm with. Oh, that's very cool, Erica. I'd love to go out. Outside preschool, I like that. Any other questions? I'm finished it. Actually, just around time.
Yep, right on time. So thank you very much. And again, for those that are local and signed up, enjoy the walk with Jake and come back again and watch another virtual event if you're from outside the area. So thanks for joining us. Bye.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.